Now it's my honor to invite Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the AU Commission, to deliver her speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief of Protocol and Program Director. Honorable Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, Your Excellency Hailemariam Desalegn, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Honorable Senators, Members of Congress, of the House of Representatives of the United States of America, esteemed ministers, members of parliament, government leaders, excellencies, members of the U.S. delegation, excellencies, representatives of the Permanent Representative Committee of the AU, members of the Diplomatic Corps, ambassadors, our Deputy Chairperson, Erastus Mwencha, fellow commissioners and representatives of AU and organs and regional economic communities, excellencies, members of the international organizations, African Union Commission staff, ladies and gentlemen, what a great honor and pleasure to welcome you, Honorable President of the United States of America and the U.S. delegation, to the headquarters of the African Union, and specifically to the Nelson Mandela Hall. Of course, this is historic. This is the first ever such visit to the headquarters of the Organization of African Unity, now the AU. Africa and the United States have strong and historic bonds, forged with blood and sweat of African sons and daughters who went across the Atlantic, toiling on the plantations and cities that made the United States into the great country it is. But today we're very proud that Africans are part of the beautiful tapestry of humanity of the United States of America, with their rich contribution to its history, literature, music, science, politics, business, the arts, and sports. Today there is no America without Africa. Honorable President, although we welcome you as the President of the United States of America, we also claim you as our own. We would like to warmly welcome the congressional delegation and recall their unwavering bipartisan support and the support of ordinary Americans to our struggles against colonialism and apartheid. Citizens of the United States contributed to African development in areas of education, producing leaders such as Pixley Kaseme, Wangari Maathai, William Tobet, and many others. And incidentally, the high school I went to, Adams College, south of Durban, founded in 1853 by an American missionary, Reverend Newton Adams. And this high school educated many prominent leaders across the continent, including the first Nobel Peace Laureate in Africa, Chief Albert Luthuli of South Africa, the first president of Botswana, Seretse Khama, Joshua Nkomo of Zimbabwe, Milton Obote of Uganda, Henry Majula of Zambia, Charles Njonjo of Kenya, and many others. So, and of course, during the 60s, a young Kenyan, Tom Mboya, lobbied for opportunities for young Africans to study in the United States, and created the African Students Foundation. Mbowe and others convinced President John F. Kennedy to support this effort and started with what became known as the Student Airlift, and gaining government support to African students to study in the US over the next decades. So the ties that bind us together go a long way, are strong and enduring. Honorable President and Excellencies, this visit comes at a time when the African continent has adopted a framework for its development for the coming 50 years, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Africa is a youthful continent and likely to remain so over the next decades. By the end of this century, 1 in 3 of the world's population will be living on this continent. Over half of this population, of course, is women. So our people, therefore, remain our most precious resource, and they will remain so forever. It is for this reason that Africa is embarking on a skills revolution to educate and train its children, young men and women, like the program that President Kennedy introduced in the 60s and 70s. We would appreciate similar cooperation in the US and African universities to help train new generations of African scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and innovators. Young people such as Siya Xuza, who at an age of 26 has a minor planet named after him for his efforts towards developing cheaper rocket fuel. This visit also takes place a few months before the critical COP21 meeting in Paris on climate change and post-2015 development agenda in New York. Even though Africa contributes the least to emissions, it is amongst the most affected by climate change. As we seek to industrialize, increase our manufacturing, modernize agriculture, and go into agro-processing, develop our blue economy, and grow our private sector, we are mindful of our responsibilities towards humanity and future generations. So Africa, therefore, takes this unique opportunity to chart a development and industrialization path that is different from the past by leapfrogging using technology, and so that as we industrialize, we do not add disproportionately to the emissions. But this is only possible if we have cooperation of partners like the United States through technology transfer and investment in infrastructure development in renewable energy and our blue and green economies, so that as we develop, we don't contribute towards destroying our common planet. In addition to energy infrastructure, Africa wants to take advantage of technology to leapfrog development in transport and other infrastructure, connecting our commercial centers, rural areas, cities through rail, highways, maritime transport, aviation, and broadband. Just last month, we launched negotiations for the Continental Free Trade Area to enhance intra-Africa and global trade and investments, contribute to free movement of people and goods and services, and development of the private sector, and also make Africa attractive to investors. Mr. President, your visit takes place also during the 70th anniversary of the UN. We'd like to recall the founding declaration that proclaimed, I quote, "the recognition of the inherent dignity and of equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family as the foundation of freedom, justice, peace in the world." As Africa, when we celebrated our 50th anniversary in 2013, we vowed not to bequeath war and conflict to future generations. Africa, therefore, remains a reliable partner to build a peaceful and just world envisaged by the Declaration, and African sons and daughters are at the forefront of peace building, peacekeeping, not only across the continent, but also in the world. The African Union, therefore, continues to work with the United Nations, and we are willing both to make contribution in human resources, but also modest financial resources. We do need assistance of the UN and partners to ensure predictable finance for our efforts. As we do this work, we must also at the same time remind the world and the UN and members like the United States that there is a historic injustice that needs to be corrected at the United Nations. Africa is the only continent that is not represented in the permanent membership of the UN Security Council. We know it cannot be a decision of one member, but we are asking all members to support us in making sure that this historic injustice is corrected. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, though we are making progress, challenges still remain. We are as concerned as you are with the global threats of terrorism and extremism in Africa and other parts of the world. And Africa is playing its part in the fight against Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. We are doing our best to find peace through IGAD and supported by the rest of the AU to find a solution in South Sudan. We also hope that we can work with the UN to find a solution to the Libyan problem. We must all work to build greater tolerance for religious, cultural, and political diversity and build inclusive societies. Another challenge, which is corruption, is a global phenomenon which is of great concern to all of us. There is a study that was done. That study was led by the former president of South Africa, President Mbeki, and he found, and his team, that there are billions, probably $50 or more billion per year, that leave our shores in illicit financial flows. But what was interesting about that study, Mr. President, was that it showed that 60% of these illicit outflows are as a result of activities of large commercial companies, with criminal activity accounting for a further 30%, and political corruption less than 10%. It means, therefore, we have to look at corruption and attack it from all angles, from the side of good governance, but good corporate culture, and of course, also look at how we deal with the criminal elements. Africa is also taking on its responsibility to fight against disease, as shown in the recent fight against the Ebola outbreak through the deployment of ASEWA and the operationalization of the African Center for Disease Control to prevent similar outbreaks. Once more, we'd like to thank yourself, Mr. President, I remember you talking at the UN last year about Ebola and mentioning frightening figures about what might happen if there is no action. And that frightened, I think, all of us, but galvanized all of us into action. And we were able to, as Africans, put teams of health workers with the support of the US and many other partners to go to these countries and to change the trajectory that had been foreseen. And we are very happy that that happened, though we are aware that it's not over yet. But I also want to say we are in the process of establishing an African Center for Disease Control, and we will benefit a lot, and we are already doing so, from cooperation with partners like the US, EU, China, and many others who have experience in that, and we want to work closely with you in that. But Excellencies, Mr. President, this year is in Africa is the year of women, so it's our year. Africa knows that its development will be much slower unless it invests in its girls and women. We are making progress, with 23 countries now having more than 30% of women in parliament, Rwanda leading not only Africa but the world. As we celebrate 2015 as the Year of Women, we also want to make further commitments in advancing the education of girls in science, technology, maths and research, in agriculture, modernizing agriculture, giving them access to not only to technology but to land rights, but also to finance, and also moving them to agro-processing and them becoming entrepreneurs. We also want to make progress in the judiciary. We are also taking steps to address violence in conflict and in peacetime, as well as other harmful cultural practices against girls and women. Women's empowerment is not only a human rights issue, but also makes economic sense, and it is a guarantee for sustainable peace, community, stability, and cohesion. It contributes to the prosperity of families and communities, especially since women on average contribute 70% of their income to the family and household, compared to only 30% that is contributed on average by men to households and families. Now, I know that this is shocking statistics, particularly to men, but maybe when you leave the hall, you can go back and look at, what do I spend my money on? Investing in women, therefore, is critical to shared prosperity and to Africa becoming a prosperous, integrated, peaceful continent driven by its people and playing a dynamic role in the world. Of course, also Africa is on the rise. There are lots of positive things about Africa, which I'll come back to. And it is some of these facts and these programs that gives us confidence that we are on the right track with our Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Of course, we also know that, in the words of Nelson Mandela, after climbing every great hill, there are many more hills to climb. But we are convinced that Africa shall, like the great marathon runners of Ethiopia, conquer those hills. Honorable President, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America is an important force in global affairs. And we have been taking the relationship between our continent and this great country to new levels, not least as a result of your leadership and your predecessors, but more importantly, for convening for the first time the Africa Leadership Summit last year, your support for agriculture, for young entrepreneurs, and energy, and many other things. We are also pleased to have with us the high-level delegation that has accompanied you from Congress, who played a pivotal role in the bipartisan support to Africa, including more recently in the extension of AGOA. And we also want to remember very fondly the late Donald Payne, who worked tirelessly on issues of Africa. But we'd also like to thank the present leadership, Karen Bass, and many others who, though it was difficult, were able to get this through. So we thank you very much. Now, Mr. President, as you discovered that we all come from this part of the world, so sometimes we look at all Africans outside Africa, not sometimes, always as part of Africa, but sometimes even human beings outside this continent, they come from here, so they are part of us. And that is why I'm going to talk about the initiative that we all appreciate that you have taken to try and normalize relations with Cuba. It is indeed impossible until it's done, as President Mandela said. I'm quoting him a lot because we're in his hall. But let me remind ourselves what Fidel Castro said in 1973 in an interview. In that interview, he predicted that the resolution and normalization of relations will only be possible when the US has its first president and the world has its first Latin American pope. So indeed, we have America as its first black president, the world has its Latin American pope. And we can see movement. Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, we remember that great hero also, Martin Luther King. He predicted that the black president will come within 25 years, but I think it took a bit longer. But it happened. That's why we're here. But today we have you, Honorable President, who, against all odds, in my view, have climbed the Mount Everest of American politics. became a young senator, and reached the high office at a young age. And of course, we will recall that when you came in, it was during the economic crisis. And you have steered America out of this crisis. I wouldn't say completely, but clearly you have. But also in electing you, Mr. President, the American people showed their belief in the oneness of humanity. It did not matter to them that your father was African, from Kenya, from our continent, that your mother was American. To them, you were a worthy American who could lead them, and that's what mattered. So this is a very good example. But let me conclude by saying, as foreign minister of my country in my previous life, when President, you were elected, I said many things, but I'll just quote one. I said that your election should inspire every African and every black person that they can reach whatever goals they have, whatever aspirations, if they work hard and focus. I now invite I thank you all, and I would like to invite the Honorable Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, to address us.